Please, do me a favor. Close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the exact smell of fresh lime paste on a sunny Saturday morning, or the sharp, melodic cry of the travelling ice seller echoing through your childhood street. Welcome back to Greece in the 1960s, 70s and 80s. Today, we are taking a deep, emotional journey into 20 completely normal things we did back then. Things that the modern world would look at with absolute disbelief. From the heavy blocks of ice arriving at our doors, to the beautiful, unspoken ritual of the Sunday promenade that we will discuss at the very end. These are the forgotten rhythms of our youth. Before we begin, we must understand how differently time flowed back then. In the 1970s, life was not an endless race against the clock. Waiting was not considered a waste of time. It was an art form. We waited for letters from relatives in Germany. We waited for the film to start at the summer cinema. We waited for the Sunday roast to bake at the neighborhood oven. Modern society tries to tell us that living without instant technology meant we were deprived or poor. But we know the truth. We know that our lives were infinitely richer in human connection, in genuine smiles, and in shared, everyday struggles. Every daily chore was a conversation, and every single day was a communal experience that bound us together. Let us rediscover that magic. Let us begin with a sound that has completely vanished from our summer mornings. If you close your eyes, you might still hear the rhythmic clip-clop of a horse or the puttering engine of a small, three-wheeled cart approaching your street. It was the ice seller shouting his arrival. In the 1960s and 1970s, electric refrigerators were a rare luxury in many Greek households. Instead, we had the wooden pagoniera, a beautiful, sturdy icebox that required daily feeding. The iceman would arrive with massive, crystal-clear blocks of ice, usually covered in thick, damp burlap sacks to keep them from melting under the fierce Mediterranean sun. We children would chase after his cart, hoping he would chip off a tiny shard of ice for us to suck on like a precious frozen treat. You could feel the intense chill radiating from the block as he carried it with heavy metal tongs. He would slide it into the top compartment of our wooden icebox. The smell of that damp wood mixed with the fresh, clean scent of melting ice is something you never forget. Today, this seems absolutely absurd to younger generations who simply push a button for crushed ice. But for us, the daily arrival of the ice seller was a ritual, a moment of neighborhood gossip, and the only way to keep our water cold and our food fresh. Let us move to the magical Sunday mornings of our youth. Think about the incredible aroma that would drift through the neighborhood streets just before noon. In the 1970s, many Greek homes had tiny kitchens and ovens were small or non-existent. So the Sunday family meal became a communal affair. Mothers and grandmothers would prepare a large round tin pan, the famous tapsi, filling it with generous pieces of lamb, potatoes, garlic, oregano, and lemon juice. Then, usually the children were tasked with carrying this heavy, precarious feast through the streets to the local neighborhood bakery. The baker, whose large, wood-fired oven was already blazing hot from the morning bread, would take our pans and mark them with a piece of white chalk to remember whose was whose. Walking home to fetch the cooked meal, hours later, the entire street smelled of roasted meat and lemon. It was a symphony of aromas. Today, carrying your raw lunch down the street for someone else to cook seems entirely absurd. But back then, this ritual turned the local bakery into the beating heart of the community, where women exchanged recipes, caught up on the week's news, and shared the simple, beautiful anticipation of a family feast. Now, let us remember how we used to communicate. If you wanted to make a phone call in a Greek neighborhood during the 1960s and 1970s, you did not reach into your pocket for a glowing screen. Private home telephones were a luxury that many families simply could not afford, and the waiting list for a line could take years. Instead, the neighborhood kiosk, the beloved periptero, was our communication hub. You would walk down to the corner where the kiosk owner sat, surrounded by hanging newspapers, chewing gum and cigarettes. He was the guardian of the heavy black rotary telephone. If someone called for you, the owner would literally step out of his booth and shout your name at the top of his lungs across the balconies. Or he would send a young neighborhood boy running up your stairs with the urgent message. When you finally took the receiver, your entire conversation was semi-public, surrounded by the bustling noise of the street and the curious ears of bystanders. Today, when everyone demands absolute privacy and instant connection, this lack of secrecy seems unimaginable. Yet there was an undeniable charm in this shared life, where the kiosk owner knew everyone's joys, sorrows, and distant relatives. Think back to the sacred silence of the Greek summer afternoon. From 2 o'clock until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the entire country came to a complete standstill. This was the time for the midday rest, the mesimeriani issihia. The wooden shutters were tightly drawn to keep out the blinding Mediterranean sun and the intense heat. Inside the darkened rooms, the air was heavy and still. As children, we were strictly forbidden from making even the slightest noise. The streets outside were completely deserted, save for the deafening, rhythmic buzzing of the cicadas in the pine trees. We would lie on our beds in the gloom, staring at the ceiling, reading our favorite comic books with a flashlight under the thin cotton sheets, trying incredibly hard not to laugh out loud or drop anything on the floor. If you dared to bounce a ball in the street during those hours, an angry neighbor would swiftly appear on a balcony to scold you. In our modern, non-stop world of 24-hour productivity, the idea of an entire city shutting down to sleep for 3 hours seems absolutely absurd. But this forced pause taught us the value of stillness, patience, and the beautiful necessity of resting our bodies and minds. Do you remember the grand street festivals of water and soap that took place every single spring? As soon as the weather turned warm, it was time to pack away the heavy winter rugs and the fluffy woolen flocati carpets. But before they were stored, they had to be washed. This was never a solitary task done behind closed doors. Women from neighbouring houses would bring their massive carpets out onto the pavement. They would unravel green rubber garden hoses, mix huge buckets of soapy water, and begin scrubbing the heavy wool with stiff brooms. The street would quickly turn into a slippery, bubbling river of suds and splashing water. For us children, this was pure magic. We would run barefoot through the cold, soapy water, sliding and laughing, getting completely soaked in the spring sunshine. The women would gossip, sing, and help each other wring out the impossibly heavy, wet rugs, draping them over balcony railings to dry in the breeze. Today, we simply call a professional cleaning service, and the carpets disappear in a van. The idea of blocking the sidewalk to scrub a rug seems ridiculous now. Yet those soapy spring mornings were a celebration of community, shared labour, and the joyous transition toward the long, golden Greek summer. Let us tune our ears to the unmistakable soundtrack of our old neighbourhoods. Before giant supermarkets swallowed our daily routines, our food came directly to our doorsteps, announcing itself with a loud, crackling megaphone. It was the travelling greengrocer, the Monavis, driving his noisy 3-wheeled truck, slowly navigating the narrow streets. His voice would echo off the concrete apartment buildings, singing a melodic list of his fresh cargo. Ripe tomatoes, sweet watermelons, crisp cucumbers, and heavy potatoes. Women would step out onto their balconies, leaning over the iron railings to inspect the produce from above. Instead of walking downstairs, a fascinating vertical transaction took place. A woven basket tied to a long, sturdy rope would be slowly lowered from the 3rd or 4th floor. Inside the basket were a few coins and a handwritten note. The grocer would weigh the vegetables on his mechanical scale, balancing the heavy iron weights, place the goods in the basket, and the housewife would haul her fresh dinner up to the sky. Trying to do this today from a modern apartment building would result in absolute chaos. But then it was a perfectly orchestrated dance of trust, convenience, and daily neighborhood theater. Now, let us wander back to the bustling schoolyard of the 1970s. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the stiff, crisp fabric of the school uniform. Until the early 1980s, every child in Greece wore the blue smock, universally known as the podia. For girls, it was a knee-length blue dress with a sharp white collar. For boys, a similar blue tunic over their trousers. Every morning, mothers would carefully iron those white collars and inspect our fingernails before sending us out the door. At the school gates, strict teachers stood watch, ensuring the uniform was immaculate and that our hair was neatly combed. The blue smock was meant to erase all social and economic differences among the students. Whether you came from a wealthy family or a poor one, in the classroom, we were all a sea of identical blue. We used to complain endlessly about the heat of the fabric and the blue ink stains that inevitably ruined the pockets. Today, children go to school in colourful designer clothes and bright sneakers. The strictness of the blue smock seems old-fashioned and absurd. But that simple blue garment gave us a profound sense of belonging, unity, and a shared identity that many of us secretly miss today. Think about the pure magic of those warm summer evenings when the sun finally dipped below the horizon. The ultimate escape was the open-air cinema, the beloved Therano. We would walk down the street to a small walled garden filled with rows of folding canvas chairs that creaked loudly every time you shifted your weight. The ground was usually covered in fine white gravel that crunched rhythmically under our sandals. The air was intoxicating, thick with the perfume of jasmine, honeysuckle, and the sweet smoke of green mosquito coils burning in the corners. In our hands, we held paper cones filled with roasted pumpkin seeds, the famous passatempos, cracking them open with our teeth while waiting for the film to start. Sometimes, right in the middle of a romantic scene, the film reel would break, the screen would flash white, and the entire audience would whistle and shout at the projectionist until the movie resumed. Today, we sit in freezing, perfectly silent multiplexes, with giant screens and digital sound, completely isolated from nature. But the open-air cinema was a living, breathing experience, where we watched movies under a canopy of stars, surrounded by the scents of the Greek summer and the shared emotions of our neighbours. Let us recall a time when capturing a memory was a rare and physical event, not a disposable click on a glass screen. On Sunday mornings, families would dress in their absolute best clothes and head to the central squares like Syntagma in Athens or to the large public parks. There, waiting patiently beside the fountains, stood the roaming photographer. He was a distinguished figure, operating a massive, heavy wooden camera mounted on a sturdy tripod. Beside him, there was almost always a painted wooden horse or a small toy car for the children to pose on. You had to stand perfectly still, holding your breath while he adjusted the lenses and threw the dark cloth over his head. The flash would pop, blinding you for a second, and then came the waiting. You did not see the photo instantly. You received a small, numbered ticket and had to wait days to get the final black and white print. Today, when we take hundreds of photos a day and delete them instantly, the idea of paying a man in a park and waiting a week for a single picture seems delightfully absurd. But that photograph was a treasure. It was framed, placed carefully on the television set, and cherished forever, a tangible piece of our history frozen in time. Consider the beautiful, almost sacred ritual of Greek hospitality that defined our homes. In the 1970s, you could never simply walk into a house and just sit down. The moment a guest crossed the threshold, the woman of the house would immediately disappear into the kitchen, returning moments later with a silver tray covered by a delicate, hand-crocheted lace doily. On this tray sat the ultimate symbol of welcome, the spoon sweet, or gliko tou koutaliou. It was a tiny glass plate bearing a single, sticky, jewel-like piece of preserved bitter orange sour cherry, or baby eggplant, resting elegantly on a small silver spoon. Beside it, a tall glass of freezing cold water. You would take the sweet in one bite, wash it down with the crisp water, and praise the hostess for her culinary skills. Making these sweets was an art form that took days of boiling, cooling, and waiting. Today, we offer our guests a quick espresso or a store-bought biscuit from a plastic wrapper. The slow, deliberate offering of a homemade spoon sweet might seem too formal or absurdly time-consuming now. But back then, it was a profound gesture of respect, sweetening the lips of the guest before the conversation even began. Let us travel back to the brilliant, blinding light of our childhood Saturdays. In the villages and the older neighborhoods of the cities, the weekend brought a ritual of purification. It was the time for whitewashing, the famous asbestoma. Women would mix thick, caustic lime powder with water in heavy metal buckets. Armed with large, coarse brushes, they would paint the lower halves of the tree trunks, the edges of the pavement stones, and the walls of the courtyards. The smell of that wet lime was sharp, incredibly clean, and utterly unforgettable. It signaled that Sunday was approaching, or that a major holiday like Easter was near. The streets transformed into glowing, pristine paths that reflected the fierce Mediterranean sun so brightly it physically hurt your eyes to look at them. Your hands would get rough and dry from the lime, and your dark clothes would be dotted with tiny white specks. Today, municipalities use mechanical sweepers and synthetic paints, and the idea of housewives manually painting the street stones every week seems absurdly labor-intensive. But that weekly whitewashing was our way of showing immense pride in our homes. It was a communal cleansing, preparing our shared world for the holy days and the warm gatherings to come. Think about how we bought our daily bread and cheese before plastic cards and digital wallets ruled our lives. At the heart of every neighborhood was the small grocery store, the empacalico. It smelled wonderfully of brine from the large wooden feta barrels, spicy cured meats, and fresh olive oil soap. When you went to buy groceries, no money actually changed hands. Instead, the grocer had a thick, worn-out notebook known as the tefteri. He would reach for a wooden pencil tucked behind his ear and carefully write down your family's name, adding the cost of a loaf of bread, half a kilo of olives, and some sugar to your running total. At the end of the month, when the father received his hard-earned salary, the family would go to the store and settle the debt. It was a system built entirely on honor and profound human trust. The grocer knew exactly what you ate, how much you earned, and when you were quietly struggling. Today, walking out of a supermarket without paying, simply promising to settle up next month, would result in an immediate arrest. It seems absurd to modern corporations. But that worn notebook was the social safety net of our youth, a testament to a time when a person's word was worth more than any currency. Let us wake up very early, just before the sun rises over the horizon. The very first sound of the day was not an electronic alarm clock, but the delicate, musical clinking of glass. It was the milkman, the Galatas, doing his daily rounds. He would leave heavy glass bottles of fresh cow or sheep milk right at our doorsteps. The milk was so incredibly fresh, it had a thick, rich layer of cream floating at the very top. Because modern pasteurization was not yet standard everywhere, our mothers had to boil the milk immediately. We would stand by the stove, watching the white liquid intensely. It would sit perfectly still for minutes, and then, in a fraction of a second, it would aggressively rise and boil over, creating a frantic panic and a terrible mess on the hot burner. The smell of that warm, boiled milk, often served with a thick slice of country bread dipped in it, was the ultimate comfort food of our childhood. Today, milk comes in sterile cardboard cartons that last for months on a supermarket shelf, and the idea of a man leaving glass bottles on a city sidewalk to be stolen or broken seems utterly absurd. Yet that morning delivery connected us directly to the land, providing a fresh, wholesome start to our long days. Now, let us remember the absolute freedom of the dirt streets and the open neighborhoods. In the 1970s, the streets did not belong to cars. They belonged entirely to the children. As soon as we finished our homework, we would rush outside. We used 2 heavy stones to mark the goalposts for a fierce game of football with a cheap plastic ball. We played hide and seek in unfinished construction sites, scraped our knees on the rough gravel, and traded colourful glass marbles in the warm dust. There were no cell phones to track us, no scheduled playdates, and no hovering parents. We were feral and free, navigating the neighbourhood like a vast, magical kingdom. The only rule was to come home when the streetlights flickered on. You would hear a beautiful symphony of mothers stepping out onto their balconies, shouting their children's names into the twilight. Today, letting a child wander the city streets unsupervised until dark seems dangerously absurd and completely irresponsible in the eyes of modern society. But those unsupervised hours taught us independence, resilience, how to negotiate with our peers, and how to heal our own scraped knees without running inside to complain. Think back to the intense dedication required to listen to your favorite music. Before instant streaming gave us every song in the world for free, music was something you had to patiently hunt for and capture. We would sit on the floor next to a bulky radio cassette player for hours, our finger hovering nervously over the red record button. We were waiting for the radio presenter to play that one specific foreign song we loved. The moment the first notes hit, we would press record, praying that the presenter would not speak over the ending, though they almost always did. We created mixtapes with immense care, labeling them with colourful pens and gifting them to our friends or secret crushes. And when the batteries in our portable players ran low, we would take a wooden pencil, insert it into the wheels of the cassette, and manually rewind the tape to save power. Explaining to a teenager today that you had to wait 3 hours to hear a song and then manually rewind it with a pencil sounds completely absurd. But that physical effort made every single song incredibly precious. We did not just consume music, we earned it, we curated it, and we cherished those physical tapes as if they were made of gold. Let us bring back a sound that could pierce right through the thickest afternoon silence. It was the loud metallic ringing of the travelling knife sharpener, the aconiaris. He was a master craftsman who carried his entire workshop on his back or attached to a heavily modified bicycle. When he arrived in the neighbourhood, he would shout his presence, and housewives would emerge from their doors carrying dull kitchen knives, heavy meat cleavers, and rusty sewing scissors. The sharpener would set up his pedal-powered grinding wheel. As he pumped his leg, the round stone would spin furiously. He would press the steel blades against the spinning stone, creating a spectacular, blinding shower of bright orange sparks that fascinated every child on the street. The shrill sound of metal grinding on stone echoed absolutely everywhere. Today, when a knife gets dull, people simply throw it away and buy a cheap new one from a giant store. A man grinding swords and scissors on the sidewalk would seem like an absurd health and safety violation now. But this humble artisan taught us the vital lesson of maintenance, that broken things should be repaired and dull things made sharp again rather than simply discarded. Consider the profound, unhurried morning ritual of the traditional Greek coffee. Long before tall paper cups of iced lattes became the norm, coffee was a delicate, slow art. It was brewed in a small brass bricky, often not on an electric stove, but on a hovoli, a tray of hot sand or glowing ashes that provided perfectly even heat. The coffee grounds and sugar were stirred slowly as the sand heated the metal. We watched intensely as the thick, rich foam, the precious kaimaki, rose to the top. If you boiled it too fast and lost the foam, the coffee was considered a tragic failure. We would sit and sip it loudly from tiny porcelain cups, the thick grounds settling at the bottom. And then came the absolute magic. The older women would flip the empty cups upside down on the saucers, wait for the grounds to dry, and read each other's fortunes in the muddy patterns. They saw letters, long journeys, and secret loves in the dark stains. Today, waiting 10 minutes for a tiny cup of coffee and then staring into the dirty cup for life advice seems delightfully absurd. But this slow ritual was never just about caffeine. It was our daily therapy, a moment of deep connection, and a sweet escape into imagination. Let us remember the physical weight of longing and the immense joy of the postman's arrival. In the 1970s, Greece was a country heavily shaped by emigration. Almost every family had a son, a brother, or an uncle working far away in the factories of Germany, the restaurants of America, or the distant cities of Australia. Communication was not a quick text message. It was a physical journey. We wrote long, deeply emotional letters on incredibly thin, crinkly blue airmail paper to save on postage weight. We poured our hearts out, sealed the envelope, and then we waited. We waited for weeks. When the postman finally walked down our street, carrying a letter bearing strange, colourful foreign stamps, the entire household would gather around. The letter was read aloud, the paper was smelled, and the distinctive handwriting was stroked like a precious relic. Today, when we can video call someone in Melbourne instantly for free, waiting 3 weeks for a piece of paper to tell you someone is alive seems painfully absurd. Yet those fragile letters held a depth of emotion, a carefully constructed narrative of our lives, and a tangible proof of love that a fleeting digital message can never truly replicate. Think about the satisfying metallic weight of money in your pockets during those remarkable years. We did not tap our glowing phones or swipe plastic cards to buy our warm bread. We used drachmas. The coins were incredibly heavy, deeply engraved, and carried the profound weight of our ancient history. Do you remember the silver 10 drachma coin with the atom symbol on one side and Pegasus on the other? Or the beautifully crafted 20 drachma coin? We children would eagerly run errands for our parents just to keep the small change. We would drop those heavy coins into a traditional clay piggy bank, the kumparas. Because it had no opening at the bottom, the only way to get your savings out was to smash the beautiful clay pot with a hammer when it was full, an act of joyous destruction that rewarded your patience. Today, money is completely invisible, just digital numbers floating on a screen. The idea of having to break a clay pot to buy a bicycle seems like an absurd fable to a modern child. But that physical currency taught us the true, tangible value of labor. We could literally feel our savings growing heavier day by day, making the reward at the end so much sweeter and profoundly real. Finally, let us arrive at the most beautiful, unspoken ritual of our shared past, the Sunday evening Volta. As the sun began to set on our sacred day of rest, the entire town would undergo a magical transformation. People would bathe, put on their best, freshly ironed clothes, polish their shoes, and step out of their houses. We did not go out to buy anything. We did not go to a loud club. We simply walked. We strolled up and down the main village square, the coastal promenade, or the central avenue of our neighbourhood. Families, teenagers, and the elderly all walked at a leisurely pace, arm in arm. We nodded to neighbours, stopped to exchange pleasantries, admired the growing children, and watched the young men and women steal shy, hopeful glances at one another. It was the beating heart of our society. Today, getting dressed up simply to walk back and forth on the exact same street for 2 hours, without a destination or a purpose, seems absolutely absurd to a world obsessed with productivity. But the Volta was our original social network. It was where we proved we belonged, where we felt the comforting presence of our community, and where we celebrated the simple, glorious fact of being alive together. As we look back at these 20 memories, a profound truth slowly emerges. We do not just miss the wooden iceboxes, the heavy drachmas, or the blue school smocks. What we truly mourn is the sensation of time stretching out beautifully before us, the unshakable feeling of our youth, and the deep, inescapable connection we had with our neighbours. We miss a world where we actually needed each other to survive, to laugh, and to celebrate. Thank you so much for walking down this beautiful, sunlit memory lane with me today. If these stories warmed your heart and brought a tear to your eye, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video to help keep our precious history alive. And now, I want to ask you a question. Which of these everyday rituals do you miss the absolute most? Or what is a beautiful memory from your own neighborhood that I forgot to mention? Please share your personal story in the comments below and let us read them together as the old friends we are.